Everyone. Thanks for coming. There wasn't a lot on the agenda today, so thought I'd start by once again asking if there's anything that anyone thinks we should discuss or wants to discuss or we should use this meeting for. I can add it to the agenda, or you can just mention it now, and I'll take notes. Okay. Well, Kwat, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I thought that maybe you could provide some updates on the work you've been doing for extensions config and how we might be using that moving forward for extensions and telemetry.
Sure. So the update is on extensions config discovery service. We implemented it in NOA. And the main benefit here is that you can apply configs separately from the rest of the networking config. That means if you want to change some configuration in telemetry, for example, the update will be localized to the extension that implements telemetry, and it will not cause any drainage or disruption to the networking. It's basically another XDS specifically for extensions. So that's the general. And our plan of it is to use it to ship WASM plugins, so we can load modules dynamically using this service, and that means you can also ship code as an option using this service.
And the other thing to note is that the way to ship WASM bits is still orthogonal to this particular process. So we can still choose the three different options that we have. Three different options that we have orthogonally to how the extension config is shipped, which gives us a lot of flexibility in deciding under what circumstances what is right. So in the simplest case, for like a smaller installation, just having everything shipped by the control plane is actually easier because it has far fewer moving parts. But that may not be recommended for like true production use.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it depends what kind of module you want to ship. If it's substantial module, then it probably shouldn't be shipped via the service. But if it's a small like script, 10 lines, it makes a lot of sense to use the service. And there's also like provisions to deal with the warming. So when it takes time to load the module, it will await until things are ready. So that's a benefit of minimizing disruption.
And is our plan to still cherry pick this back to 1.7 and have this be part of the 1.7 release?
Yeah, so we're gonna cherry pick it into 1.7 proxy, but not control plane, because we don't have a good design yet how to implement it in pilot. We decided not to do it for 1.7 and delay it for later. But you should be able to use Onward Filter to point proxies to a different service. So that means we can experiment with 1.8 pilot running against 1.7 proxies.
Okay. And just in case people were looking to try this out, do we have a reference implementation or framework that we could use for that, or is that still in development?
No, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the API, because we still need to consume something from the user side. And I mean, part of it, there are ideas to use it to optimize some of existing pilot code. For example, the authorization API right now causes listener reload every time you change any authorization config, which is not always what you want for HTTP traffic. And so it could be used there, but we need a good design, because I mean, if once you come to shipping binaries, it changes the workload on pilot, and we have to make sure it's done right. there's no reference implementation. The service is just implemented, so there's no existing server as far as I know.
You have something in the Go control plane, right, Quad? Or was that just for
so
testing?
it's very easy to write a static server. So I did write one, and it's not that hard. But since you need to have a way to program it, right? We need to. That's where discussion should be. So what do we supply to this server so it can create appropriate response to client envoy?
And so I guess the related question is that the lookup is by name, correct? The lookup is by a config name.
Yes.
Which means that that name differs slightly from the semantic names that we have been using. So for example, we use istio.stats to mean an abstract notion of stats, but we actually apply different configurations to stats based on whether we deliver it to ingress or a sidecar. So I think that will also have to be taken into account. That now name actually means a config set, not just.
I mean, you can always scope it by proxies, right? So it could be same named resource that is not the same across different proxies.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I guess that's we will need to think of that.
So the related question is, I know that I saw that config dump was not yet implemented or coming. How do we debug extensions and find out which versions of these configs they have when they're running?
There's a lot of stats implemented, so it's just another XDS, so the standard XDS metrics apply. And there's a config reload stat that allows you to monitor updates. The config dump was never always reliable in any way. It's not never actual truth, so you should always kind of assume some kind of approximation. But we should implement it for this service too, and I think that was one of the remaining items. There's also, I mean, it's not implemented for network filters as well and for like access log filters. So there's a bunch of follow-ups that need to be done.
And those surely will not be into Istio 1.7. Those will only go upstream. Yeah.
Yeah. The hardest one was making HTTP work. I think the hardest one is done.
So I have a small, I guess, non-update, which is that Kuat and I did do some more work on just the supportable Onward Filter thing, which is like the scoped down version of what we need. But I don't have the concrete proposal yet. So it will be sent out shortly, though. Within the next couple of days, I'll send out the supportable Onward Filter proposal. And
we're expecting that to be reviewed in the network working group. Is that where people should go?
Okay. Yeah. So this one will be reviewed in the networking group. And the minimal part. So the goal is to make it modest so that we can make progress. But yeah, I mean, like this group is the primary user of that API for filters specifically. So
okay. Are there any other topics that people want to provide updates on?
Yeah, I have an update on one of the issues. Let me think there. So it's about exposing more Onward stats. So I think there will be so basically the issue is track some experiment that I did and see whether if it is possible to expose more Onward stats. Currently, we are omitting the listener and cluster related stats due to the performance issue that we're running to back to like 1011. And this issue is to see how much improvement that performance-wide Onward has made on stats and see whether we can enable them, enable all the stats or more stats by default. And the experiment that I did shows that like for a gateway kind of proxy, if we install like 200 clusters there, CPU and memory usage is still not looking good. It could be elevated for like 20 or 30%. As sidecar, like we're like not that many cluster size installed. CPU usage looks a bit better than gateway. It's less than 10%, but the memory part of it might because we are sending less requests per second when do the sidecar testing, but memory still grows a lot. It grows about like 30% at sidecar, even with just 20 or 30 clusters. So I think like the conclusion I have is that it's still not very good or very appropriate to turn on all the stats. So we still need to use whitelist based approach to expose stats that we think that would be useful or important for debugging. I'm not sure whether there are some other opinions from this group, or should we consult Envoy folks on whether this result is expected, or do we need to generate some profiling?
I think you've already CC'd Joshua Moranza on this.
Yeah,
right?
but he hasn't replied, so I might send him an email.
So let's just make sure he knows that this is done and we are headed towards this decision.
Yeah.
But I think so I think that being able to add more metrics across the mesh is something that we don't easily support today, right?
We have the annotation. Oh, across the mesh. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we need, right. So I think that clearly Envoy has made progress, but from your experiment, it's not enough. But if someone wants more metrics across the mesh, then we just don't give them an easy way to do it at all today. So I think that would at least enable experimentation and put the control back in terms of users. But in terms of which other metrics we want, I think we should be able to come up with a budget and say we have room for like whatever 5-10 more metrics, and then just get those important ones in.
I think we already turned on some low-cost metrics, like the manager metrics, etc. But
right, I think per cluster metrics, but just a few, not all. Right, like if you turn on cluster, you get like all whatever 30, 50, some large number. So if we can just say that, hey, in a cluster we just think that these two are the top most important, then that could be I think that's a good starting point.
Yes.
Have you also looked at Prometheus, memory, CPU, cardinality type stuff?
Yeah, if I turn on all stats, Prometheus is not looking good. So
okay,
I mean, like if eventually we're going to turn on all stats, then we need to make it very clear that Prometheus need to ignore those some metrics during scripting. So
can Pilot generate some of those stats instead? But all the XDS stats could be done on Pilot, right?
Yeah, I mean, at Sidecar we expose XDS stats already. It's not expensive, but the expensive part is the stats that only available at Sidecar, like the cluster, etc.
Yeah, because those are basically n squared in Prometheus, right? Because you have n clusters, and each cluster has n clusters like being scraped.
Yeah, it'd be nice to aggregate them based on cluster instead. But that's
right. So I think that we don't necessarily have to solve the Prometheus problem here, but I think it's important to give the deployer a choice of how much they want to expose, and then we already have the Prometheus federation thing, right? So you can have recording rules, and you can downsample, or you can aggregate it at Prometheus to the appropriate amount. So what we need to do as a group is to know the cost and then have a solution, and then we can let the user decide how much cost they want to pay to get those extra metrics.
Yeah, that is update for this. I can definitely ping Josh for more to get more insight into this. I will follow up in the next working group meeting. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, and sorry to barge in, but what is the primary driver for cost outside of volume? So yes, there's a certain amount of volume for logs, and assuming that they're going to go and log everything they can log, what is the primary factor that drives cost?
It's a memory and CPU. So I will spend lots of memory and CPU on collecting stats. So that is the driving factor to make the decision here. I think that is what that means. Is there anything else that we should consider for cost?
No. So cost on the proxy is kind of the most important part, because it gets multiplied by the size of the mesh, and then cost that is imposed on the telemetry system, which is Prometheus or like Stackdriver or whatever else, it's like the second consideration. Yeah, those are the only two.
Got it. In that sense, cost is a function of resources. This is what we're saying. Cost is a function of CPU and memory consumption. That's what it means to us.
Oh, we weren't actually thinking in terms of dollar cost at all. We were just thinking in terms of resource costs. So I think this discussion sort of ended at CPU and memory.
Okay. I was curious if things were clarifying that.
I mean, there is downstream cost, right? Once you've collected it, there's storage, and if you're aggregating and number, that all falls out. The more stuff that you collect, obviously, the more space it's going to take, the more time series you have, the slower queries are going to be, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's a huge amount of cost actually, resource-wise, especially if you're collecting things that aren't used in any way.
Is there an upper bound to that cost? If I am logging everything that I can log, is there an upper bound for that resource consumption? And do we know what that upper bound is? Is it something like millicores or so and so gigabytes of RAM, or is that unbound?
I mean, I would say it's up to the customer. How many resources do they want to throw at it?
You can keep on adding workers, and I've seen Envoy up to like 6 gigabytes of RAM if you really want to throw a lot of stuff at it. So yeah, it depends on what your configurations are.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Peter, do you want to mention anything else, or do you think we've covered that?
The only other comment I'd make is instead of upper bound, I think it's lower bound that's a little more interesting. You know, how many resources are you using just to do minimal amounts of things? And that, I don't know what the answer is there, but you obviously want it to be as low as it can be.
Good point. And I think if we find that, we can probably think of an upper bound or think of an asymptote. Maybe. Or maybe we come to a function where we can model what that cost will be and how it grows.
I'm just curious. I know Linkerd uses like a very low amount of memory in the sidecars. Do they do that because they have less stats, or they just have a more efficient stats implementation? Like I've seen them using, I don't know exactly, but like a couple megabytes of memory, whereas Envoy is like 30 megabytes out, out of the box. It's quite a bit more.
Yeah, actually, a lot of that memory, even if you switch off all stats collection, Envoy still uses quite a bit memory based on the
right from
size.
the cluster overhead.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So the stats is kind of the secondary part, and the other thing is the cardinality of Envoy stats is actually somewhat bounded. It is actually bounded because it doesn't have the configurability that istio stats have, which can lead to cardinality explosion. So it's quite predictable and well known. Like once you add a cluster, you get these 20 things, and that's it. You just get those 20 things.
Quick question here. So the Envoy level stats, I see the issue filed by Peter, I think. Are they actually being asked by customers, or is it something that Istio devs who are very familiar with proxy crave?
So these are free, like these are needed from time to time during debugging, and some of them have equivalent in istio stats, and some of them don't. But like that's the only time that I have turned them on, is because either debugging. Now there are certain like downstream stats and like some other stats which we just don't have exact equivalents, and people do turn them on using the annotations. So this was to investigate what would it take to just allow everything, and what's the resource cost of that exercise.
So if we're only using it for debugging, it would be interesting if we could have just sort of a like debug mode, right? Or some way of, that's what you're getting at, an easy way to turn on additional metrics mesh-wide. But it sounds like we don't want to do this on a consistent basis all the time, but we want to turn it on for the 30 minutes that we're looking at a cluster, right? And then be able to easily switch it back off.
Yeah, and additionally, I was thinking, can STO-CTL do something here? If you have to look at time series data over a long time, there's limited value there's limited value STO-CTL can provide. But if it is just for interim debugging for like 30, 40 minutes, I'm just throwing ideas out there so that we can avoid the impact globally, but still provide these metrics when the time comes, right?
So that requires a proxy restart, right? If you want to expose more stats. That the stats configuration is in Bootstrap right now.
Right.
So I think restart will make it not very useful to provide debugging signals. Or in some cases, it will make it pause debug signal.
it'd be nice if we could have that be driven by
through
continuity.
XDS.
Yeah.
So I think the work that actually Peter and then someone else is doing to get to connect the sandbox stat system to an alternate stat system like OpenCensus, right? Like once we have that fully baked in, we should be able to go back with some more data and conviction to the Envoy community and say, okay, can you add this and not have everything in the bootstrap? Yeah, like that will be the first step. So
Do we have any idea if OpenCensus is actually more efficient or it's just more configurable?
OpenCensus is definitely efficient. I don't know about more or less. So if you look at, so we use OpenCensus for Stackdriver, and in like measurements, if you see the Stackdriver measurement, which directly uses OpenCensus and sends it out, is basically the same cost as stat system, which uses Envoy's native pipeline. It's very close. Okay, so there is one I'm just looking for. So there is an issue that Doug has opened for some time about updating the Grafana dashboard with some of the newly created WASM stats, and I'm just looking for someone who is able and willing to do that.
Yeah, and the idea here would be we want to make it easy to monitor extensions as you add them, and start to expose more information about how they're behaving.
Yep. All right. Well, okay.
Like there's a lot of data.
Yeah, seems like there is a lot of data. Okay. All right. I'll see what I can do there. Everyone else is busy.
Okay, I did have some other updates. I mean, we should probably just talk about for a second here. The big one being that Mixer is now gone from the code base. And there's a shim, the gRPC shim is sort of a bad name for it, is being developed against the 1.7 code base. And I think right now the biggest thing left is developing an integration test around the functionality. So I think it's almost ready to go. So if anyone is still, interested in the gRPC adapters for Mixer and testing them with Envoy XAuth or Access Log Service, we should have something in a week or two that will allow doing that with 1.7. And then we'll need to develop the docs for how to use that in 1.8 if you still don't want to transition your out-of-process adapters. So I just wanted to share that update. If you see anything, I mean, this relates to the dashboard updates and other stuff, there's still probably small vestiges of Mixer left in the 1.8 code base. So if you see anything anywhere that still references it, it'd be a good time to go ahead and just clean that up as you're working through. So I did want to mention that. And I also, thanks Ed and others who added the deprecation and detection tools for 1.7. I think that's going to be super useful as well. That's a big part of being able to remove mixers. So thank you for that work. The other thing I wanted to bring up is I've started thinking a little bit again about the sort of metadata discovery service that we talked about several times in the past. There have been a number of open issues where metadata exchange has failed for some reason, maybe errors, maybe calls coming from out of mesh or going to out of mesh. And so I didn't know if anyone had done any concrete thinking about that or advanced it. I know Niraj and Jacob, you guys had looked at that a little bit. I don't know if we have any good thoughts there or our thinking has advanced on how to do metadata discovery. So I just wanted to bring that up and sort of ask the group what their thoughts were on that.
So I think the prioritization, like deciding the priority is one of the, it's not exactly the same, but I think we have to agree on the priority. I think what happened last time was, even though we did agree, it wasn't really a firm agreement, right? Because we weren't willing to put any effort into it. Like we as Google did not, and neither did Neeraj and his team. So we really need a consensus on priority like that. And yeah, if it is important, then we do need to like put serious effort into it. So yeah, I'm not commenting on like design or technology or anything like that here. I think, but I'm just saying we all have to think it's important.
And that's a good point. I guess maybe it's just my sort of the bias on the issues I've seen. But it does seem like it keeps coming up in more and more scenarios. Like there's, different conditions under which the exchange fails, more than just being out of mesh. So it seems to me that we're finding more and more edge cases now in which something like this would be useful.
These mostly exceptional cases, or it's like normal behavior? It sounds like a lot of it is fails of something sorts on the network.
Right. I mean, I think that's fair that this is coming in cases where things fail. But the number of reports of those seem to have gone up. So I don't know how that impacts our priority, but I feel like we're going to keep running into this.
Right. So the question is, if we had a solution that was already ready, would it be a better solution at which point we can just switch off metadata exchange, right? We can say, okay, fine, we don't need it because this service is so reliable and so good that like we just don't need it. So I would like us to give that some thought, as in, is it strictly better? Are there places where we need both? If it does turn out to be strictly better, then I would say we would be able to put more resources behind it, right? It's not, it is more efficient for sure, but it does make the code more complex, because now you have to wait until to mint metrics, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of replacing metadata exchange, but I was thinking more of an augmentation. But you're right, if it exists.
Right, if it exists and does everything that we want it to do, then it gets one less thing. It removes one more thing from the data path.
I don't think it can do everything that we do already, because you get some approximation of what we do now. If you cannot talk to some upstream, means you don't have a choice of an endpoint, so you don't actually know which endpoint you're talking to.
But that's same thing with metadata exchange, right? Unless the connection is complete, we don't exchange anything.
Yeah, I'm just saying this service cannot give you full information because you simply don't know input information, right? So you get some approximation of what you're getting, but it's not complete.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to raise this and have it reach sort of the group consciousness is something we should look at, I think, for 1.8, figure out what we want to do there. Are there other topics, other things that we should discuss this week? I don't know of a lot of other updates from work that's been ongoing. So. If not, maybe we should just...
Yep, you can adjourn then.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.